June, only 11 years old, sat on the dirty sidewalk in front of the Harmonia Theater, playing with her eyes closed. Her hands trembled from the cold. Her lips were cracked. Her stomach made more noise than the melody. She wasn't begging. She said nothing. She just played, because if she stopped, she might not make it until dawn. Inside, under golden lights and lavish applause, the famous violinist Margaret Halden was finishing her performance, ovationed, impenetrable. But when she stepped onto the stairs of the side exit and heard that raw music echoing through the night, she stopped. Something in that melody made her shiver. She recognized every note. It was impossible. That hungry child was playing the same song her mother used to sing to her, before disappearing forever. If you're touched by this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any transformative moments like this. The flute jingled between her purple fingers as June blew hard, sitting on a manhole cover that let out warm steam. No one else was around, just blurry figures hurrying past and eyes that didn't see. The fragile sound sliced through the night as if begging not to be forgotten. It was an irregular, unstable melody, but filled with a sorrow no conservatory could teach someone to express. The lights of the Harmonia Theater shimmered just meters away, where well-dressed couples stepped out of black chauffeur-driven cars. Inside, the renowned violinist Margaret Halden performed for a select audience. Conductors, critics, cultural ambassadors, all gathered for the gala night for youth music. But outside, an 11-year-old girl without socks, with a bruised ankle and cracked lips, played to survive. There was no hat laid out, no plea, just notes. And between each note, a silent request. "Don't take me back." A guard came out the side of the building, annoyed. "Hey, I told you yesterday this isn't the place for that. Get out of here, go on." June paused for a second, but resumed playing. She was determined. That night felt different. She didn't know why, but something pushed her to stay. The notes came out like breath. If she stopped, maybe she wouldn't breathe anymore. Margaret exited through the back of the theater a few minutes later, wrapped in her gray English wool coat, hair neatly pinned. She was in a hurry. She just wanted to get to the car and silence the audience's euphoria. Concert nights made her nauseous, from all the people smiling at her without truly hearing her. But that night she heard something, a childish sound, rough and primitive, but familiar. She stopped. Her steps froze at the curb. Her eyes searched for the source of the sound, and then she saw her. A thin girl, hunched over herself, blowing into a chipped flute with such devotion it seemed she was speaking to the dead. The music. Impossible. That was the song her mother used to sing. An intimate melody. Never published, never played in public. Margaret took a step, then another. She approached, standing still before the child. When June saw her, she shrank, like someone expecting to be kicked out again. "Where did you learn that?" Margaret asked without thinking. June hesitated. Her eyes were like a cornered animal's. "I didn't learn it. I just play." Margaret crouched, ignoring the snow beginning to fall. "Do you know the name of that song?" The girl shook her head. Margaret swallowed hard. The world seemed to tremble beneath her. Her heart beat like it hadn't in decades. "Do you have anywhere to go?" June didn't answer. Margaret extended her hand. "Just for one night." June looked around, then at the hand, then at the flute, and then slowly, she accepted the gesture. The driver opened the door without question. June entered warily, sitting at the edge of the seat like someone afraid of being kicked out at any moment. Margaret remained silent the entire ride. Arriving at the penthouse, June hesitated to get out of the car. "Come on in," said Margaret, already opening the glass door. "It's warm." The girl entered. The heat hit her hard, almost aggressively. The scent of polished wood, old books, and lavender filled the air. Everything there was too clean, too gentle. Margaret pointed to the couch. "Sit down. I'll bring something to eat." June walked carefully, as if stepping on thin ice. She sat at the edge of the couch, clutching the flute to her chest. Margaret returned with a tray, hot soup, buttered bread, an apple sliced into pieces. The girl hesitated. "Is it poisoned?" she asked with no irony. Margaret's eyes widened. Then she smiled sideways. "No, and if it is, we'll die together." June ate slowly, each spoonful chewed with the urgency of someone who knows the rhythm of hunger. "Have you always lived on the streets?" Margaret asked. "Since I was 7, More or less. Where are your parents? I don't know. They say my mom left. And my dad never showed up. Margaret leaned back in the armchair. She watched the girl with eyes searching for a bigger answer. That melody. How could it be? How did you get that flute? Found it in a donation basket near a church. Some man said it belonged to a woman who disappeared from the neighborhood years ago. Margaret felt her stomach sink. That couldn't be. May I see it? June hesitated, then handed it over. The flute was simple, worn out. But one thing caught her attention. Inside the back cap, covered by adhesive tape, there was an inscription. Margaret removed it carefully. There it was. E. Halden. Her heart raced. It was her mother's name, Eleanor Halden. Her hands trembled. She went to the library and pulled out an old diary she had kept since she was 18. Inside, yellowed with time, was the sheet music. Lullaby for Rainy Girls. Lyrics and melody identical to what June had been playing. She returned to the living room, showing it to the girl. Is this the song you play? June nodded. I hear it in my head since I was little. A woman sings it, but I never see her face. Margaret sat beside her. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the city slept under snow. The two remained silent for long minutes until Margaret said, "You won't sleep on the street anymore." June looked at her suspiciously. "What if you change your mind tomorrow?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Then tonight counts for two." June smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. But she smiled. And in that smile, Margaret felt something she hadn't since childhood. A place where pain could rest without fear. Margaret woke up early. She hadn't slept all night. She spent hours watching June curled up on the couch, the flute clutched in her arms like a child clings to a blanket after a nightmare. The fireplace had already gone out, and the silence of dawn seemed to hold the air still. She made coffee, sliced fruit, warmed milk when the girl slowly opened her eyes. There was no startle, just that same gaze, far too old for such a young face. "Good morning," said Margaret. June didn't reply. She sat up and pulled the flute closer, still silent. "Did you sleep well?" A slight shrug. It was all the trust she could offer in that moment. Margaret served the coffee and didn't push. She turned on the radio very low. Something Baroque was playing. June didn't react to the music. She ate like someone unsure if any of this was real. And maybe it wasn't. Hours later, the two sat at opposite ends of the room. Margaret reread old scores. June drew with an eyeliner she'd found in the bathroom. She scribbled abstract shapes, and among them, a female face with features resembling Margaret's. The violinist masked her reaction. "That face? Is it someone you know?" June looked at the drawing, then at Margaret. "I think it's her, the woman from the song. The one you hear in your dreams?" The girl nodded, returned to drawing. In the afternoon, Margaret called the conductor at the Chicago Youth Institute. "I need you to hear someone. Today." "Margaret, that's impossible. We have rehearsal. Please, 10 minutes. It's important." She hung up and turned to June. "Would you like to come with me somewhere?" The girl hesitated but nodded. In the car, June held the flute tightly. Margaret kept her eyes on the road, but her mind spun. She had spent her life believing she'd lost everything when her mother vanished. And now this girl appeared carrying fragments that felt impossible. They arrived at the conservatory. The musicians greeted her with reverence. Some whispered when they saw the dirty girl by her side. Margaret led June to the small rehearsal stage. "Can you play here? Like you did yesterday?" June climbed up with hesitant steps. The room was large, with high windows and chairs arranged in a circle. She stood in the center, looked around, and without warning began to play. The sound filled the hall. It wasn't in tune. It wasn't technical, but it was alive. The conductor entering the room froze at the doorway. The music seemed to tell something words could never express. Margaret watched from afar, her heart in suspense. For the first time in years, she felt vulnerable before art, and it came from a child. When June finished, there was a heavy silence. The conductor approached. He looked at Margaret, then at the girl. "You can't teach this," he whispered. "This is pain." On the way back, Margaret said nothing. She just turned on the radio and let it play quietly. Once home, June ran to the bathroom. Margaret heard her vomiting. She rushed there. The girl was pale, kneeling on the floor. "What's wrong?" I'm not used to eating so much. Margaret knelt beside her, gently holding her hair. It'll pass. It was in that simple gesture that something cracked open. June rested her forehead on Margaret's shoulder. She didn't cry, but she stayed there, for minutes. Night arrived with light snow. Margaret lit candles throughout the house. She played piano softly. June lay on the rug listening. "Can I stay just tonight?" the girl whispered. Margaret came closer. "You can stay as many days as you want." June bit her lip. The flute lay beside them, between the two. She then shared for the first time that she had dreamed of that song since she was 5, always the same way. She was in a dark place, a woman sang, and a voice said, "Follow the music, and you'll find where you belong." Margaret felt tears rising, but held them back. The girl fell asleep early, as if that house was at last a place where fear could rest. And Margaret, alone in the kitchen, turned on a dim light and opened her mother's diary. There it was, a forgotten note. "To the girl who cries in silence, this song will be a home until I can be again." Margaret closed the diary, her heart suspended. June wasn't just a coincidence. She was an answer. The phone call echoed through the room the next morning. Margaret turned off the piano and answered in a dry voice. "Mrs. Halden, this is the Institute. Are you sure about what you're proposing?" She responded with a simple, firm yes. June watched from the stairs without making a sound. In the last 2 days, she had learned to move through the house as if she were still on the streets. Silent, discreet, ready to run. "They want you to play at a concert," said Margaret as she hung up. "Me? With me. On stage. End of the month." June dropped the flute into her lap. "But I don't know how to play like you." "Exactly. You play what no one else does." The girl didn't respond, but something in her eyes lit up. In the following days, Margaret created a routine. In the morning, practice. Afternoon, reading. Evening, free music. She never demanded perfection. She wanted June to find a voice in the flute. Not a technique, but not everything was acceptance. At the first orchestra meeting, the conductor opposed the idea. "A street girl? No training? At a gala event?" Margaret looked at him firmly. "It's her or nothing. Music doesn't belong only to standards." Silence, then a nod. Against Margaret's fame, no one dared to argue. The news of the concert spread quickly. Critics commented. TV shows wanted interviews. The famous violinist and her mysterious protégé. June, however, didn't seem excited. She spent hours in silence, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes, she went to her room and drew. One day, Margaret walked in and saw the paper. A stage, a crowd, and herself alone, standing with the flute in her hands. "Are you afraid?" June nodded. "Not of messing up," she murmured. "Of not being felt." Margaret sat beside her. "They'll feel it, because you play with what I lost." The day arrived. The Harmonia Theater was packed. More than in the last 3 decades. Cameras, spotlights, whispers. June trembled in the dressing room. "I can't do it," she said. "Close your eyes. Remember the woman from the song." The girl took a deep breath, picked up the flute. If you mess up, I'll mess up with you." The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. The orchestra played the first pieces. Then, a short intermission. And finally, the MC announced, "Tonight, for the first time on the Harmonia stage, Margaret Halden will share her performance with someone no one knows, but everyone should hear." The murmur was immediate. The curtains opened. Margaret entered first with her violin. Behind her, timid, shoulders low and eyes downcast, June. She stopped at the center. The audience watched. Some frowned. June raised the flute, but nothing came out. Silence. 1 second, 2, 3. Then a timid laugh from the back of the hall. The girl lowered her arms. Margaret stepped forward and began to play, but played wrong, on purpose. 3 dissonant notes. The audience exchanged glances. June looked at her. "I forgot." "No, you didn't. Close your eyes." The girl inhaled and blew. The first note came out weak. The second, steadier. The third, alive. And then she played. She played as if she were back on the manhole cover, as if no one were watching. Margaret followed with the violin, but in the background, she was now the support, not the star. The theater went still. Some people cried. Others closed their eyes. It was imperfect. It was human. It was real. When it ended, there was a suspended moment. And then, a standing ovation. Long, genuine. The conductor in the corner wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. Critics forgot their notepads. Margaret and June looked at each other. No words. In the dressing room, the girl collapsed to the floor. She was pale but smiling. "They heard me." "Yes," said Margaret. "And you changed them." On the way out, an elderly woman approached with an old flute in her hands. "This belonged to my sister. She disappeared years ago. We never knew why." Margaret took the instrument. In the corner, a faded inscription. E.H. Another flute. Another piece of the puzzle. The woman smiled. "She used to sing to my niece, a girl who was taken when she was little." Margaret felt her knees give way. "What was your sister's name?" "Eleanor." Breath stopped. The world spun. But June just smiled. She knew. 1 month later, the house was no longer silent. June woke before the sun, made chamomile tea, and rehearsed on the couch with the flute resting on her knee. Margaret watched from the kitchen, letting her coffee grow cold as she listened, like someone witnessing the blooming of a rare flower no one else had ever seen. The city now knew the girl from the concert. Headlines called her the sound of the streets, the invisible flute, the dissonant miracle. She was invited to TV shows, interviews, scholarship offers. But Margaret declined most of them. She didn't want showcases. She wanted fertile ground. One day, June walked into Margaret's office with a letter in hand. "It's from the shelter. They want to know if I'm in good hands." Margaret smiled. "Do you want to answer?" The girl nodded. She wrote, "I'm home," for the first time. That evening, Margaret took June to see the Halden Foundation, an old music project for at-risk children that had never left the drawing board. Together, they opened the closet and dusted off the forgotten instruments. They started with 3 students, then 10, then 40. June taught classes every Wednesday. She sat on the floor with the little ones. They played off-key, laughed, shouted. She smiled. And Margaret relearned how to cry. During one of those afternoons, an elderly man arrived at the foundation's door. "Excuse me, is this the girl who played with Margaret Halden?" June was at the back of the room. When she saw the man, she froze. He was holding a flute identical to hers. "This belonged to my daughter. She disappeared at age 5. She was taken. We never found her." June walked up to him, looked into his eyes. "What was her name?" "Evelyn." The name hung in the air. Margaret appeared. "Did you say Evelyn?" The man nodded, his eyes filled with tears. June then opened her flute. Inside, next to the name E.H., there was a faded inscription. "For Evelyn, may music find you." The room fell silent. It wasn't just a coincidence. The girl who had run from the shelter, who played to the void, who drew faces without knowing where they came from, was Evelyn. Her mother had been Eleanor Halden's sister. June was, by blood and by music, part of Margaret's story. They embraced right there. No logic, no DNA test, no questions. Because sometimes, truth is clearer in sound than in words. Years later, June became a composer. Her first album was called Invisible Home. Each track was dedicated to a day she had survived playing without being heard. The foundation grew. Margaret came to be known simply as the woman who listened. She said little, played less, but her name was on the walls, on the sheet music, in the eyes of the students. June received letters from all over the world. Children who felt embraced when they heard the flute. Adults who remembered forgotten dreams. Ordinary people who found, in that sound, a reason to begin again. She started composing for films, for plays, for schools. But her greatest work was invisible. The hundreds of boys and girls who now played flutes, violins, trumpets, drums, and who would never sleep on the streets again. And when Margaret passed, peacefully, serenely at home, her last wish was simple. Let her play alone. She'll never be alone again. On the night of the tribute, the Harmonia Theater filled with candles, June stepped onto the stage with her old flute. Silence. Only the sound. She gave no speech. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and blew, and a single note was enough. One single note. And the entire theater remembered. Once upon a time, there was a girl who played on the streets and, with a forgotten melody, rebuilt a world. If this story stirred something deep inside you, leave a like so more people can feel the same emotion. And subscribe to the channel. Here, every story isn't just told, it's felt. You're part of this now. Stay with us for another moving story.